It's absolutely essential, isn't it, at this time every week, if he can possibly fit us in, because we know he's the busiest correspondent on the planet, to catch up with Simon Marks and essentially ask what the beep is going on across the pond, because we're never short of stories and we're never short of things to discuss. Simon, hello, thank you so much for joining me. I've got a
Great
list.
being with you, as ever, Vanessa.
I've got a whole list of things, a whole list of topics. They're all printed on my screen, so I don't forget to ask you a single thing. And I don't usually have a list of topics. But anyway, let's kick off with number one on the list. Oh, God. More Epstein files expected, Simon.
Well, I think that's perfectly likely. I mean, not necessarily imminently, but the Department of Justice is now coming under so much pressure from so many different quarters to release more of the documents. Remember, they put 3 million documents into the public domain a couple of Fridays ago, but we now know that they've withheld roughly the same number of documents again. And there are some calculations that suggest they may have even more than that number, 3 million documents that they've held back. The Department of Justice says it's holding those documents back because were they to release them publicly, they would be at risk of putting sensitive information about Epstein's victims and survivors into the public domain, to which, of course, the victims and survivors say, well, you already did that 2 weeks ago, despite promising us that you wouldn't. They also say that the release of these additional documents could prejudice ongoing investigations. And remember that even this week, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, said to the American public during that extraordinarily contentious session that she had up on Capitol Hill that the Department of Justice is still open to receiving information, tips, anything that the public wants to turn over with regard to Jeffrey Epstein. And any new information can, of course, spark new investigations. But Democrats, many Republicans from Donald Trump's MAGA base, the victims and survivors themselves, all now saying that what has been done so far is unsatisfactory. There's more that needs to be done. And as you know, some of those Democrats and other members of the committee, Republicans too, went into the Department of Justice and were shown some of the documents that have not yet been released. And the Democrats on the committee and treacherous Republicans like Congressman Thomas Massey of Kentucky all came out and immediately accused Donald Trump's Department of Justice of being engaged in a cover-up. So, look, I think there is pressure that will not ultimately be able to be resisted to put more of those documents into the public domain.
I mean, you've talked about Pam Bondi's absolutely remarkable, explosive, I don't know if you would call it a meltdown, an implosion, an eruption, but whatever it is, we're not accustomed to that kind of conduct, language or behaviour. So maybe you can just fill us in and tell us who is Pam Bondi and why was it such a big deal? Because it definitely was.
Well, very big deal. She occupies one of the highest offices of state here. She's Donald Trump's Attorney General. She is the nation's chief law enforcement officer. She's presiding over a Department of Justice that is no longer enjoying its traditional independence from the presidency. It has become a tool of Donald Trump's personal retribution. She, as we saw in that hearing, is slavishly loyal to him. And what she was really doing in that hearing was not just pushing back and refusing to answer pretty much any questions from anyone, certainly no questions that related to her handling of the Epstein case or indeed to the Department of Justice's handling of the killings in Minneapolis of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, the two American citizens gunned down there by ICE and Border Patrol agents respectively. What she was also doing was deliberately and vigorously cocking a snook at the entire constitutional process of checks and balances in this country. Congress is constitutionally required to hold members of the president's cabinet accountable for the way in which they are running their departments and the decisions they have made. And Pam Bondi, and we've seen this from other members of the president's cabinet, but nowhere near as dramatically as we witnessed it from Pam Bondi this week, made it absolutely apparent she has no interest in accountability, in transparency. She, as she kept saying, she wasn't going to be dragged into the gutter by these people. Well, they weren't trying to drag her into the gutter. They were trying to get clear answers to the way in which she's handled a whole variety of different issues on her watch. And she is simply unwilling in any way to be accountable. And that is part and parcel of the process of attacking the Constitution that has been taking place relentlessly here over the last 13 months.
And what's the aftermath of that there? Because it would I mean, cocking a snook is in fact a euphemism. It isn't usually, but it really underplays, doesn't it, what she was really doing, and also the contempt that she showed for the victims, many of whom were standing there right a few yards away from her. I mean, the kind of level of kind of hostility and contempt that she was hurling out of her face towards them was just quite remarkable, wasn't it?
Well, and that is exactly the problem that she faces. She might have been able to get away with it if she hadn't been so witheringly disdainful and haughty towards the survivors and victims of Jeffrey Epstein, who at one point were asked by a Democrat on the committee to stand up, raise their hands if they had been unable to secure a meeting with her or anyone else in her Department of Justice. They all dutifully raised their hands. Not a single one of them had been able to get any kind of response from Donald Trump's Department of Justice. She was challenged to turn round and look at them and apologise to them, and she would not take the bait. And as a result of that, key influencers within Donald Trump's Make America Great Again movement are now calling for her either to be fired or to resign. It was the appalling treatment that Democrats were able to goad her into of Epstein's survivors and victims that has really caused a tremendous difficulty here. But there's no sign that she's going. President Trump called her testimony fantastic.
My God, and you know, the kind of the phrase, you know, let's think of the victims, you know, we are concerned with the victims. Our various members of our royal family, the King himself, the Prince and Princess of Wales, through a spokesman, have all said, you know, we are absolutely thinking of the victims. But actually, with the exception of Virginia Giuffre, we don't really know who any of the victims are. So when we say we're thinking of them, we're thinking some kind of completely nebulous non-thought about people that we don't know. We're just thinking, God, that was awful. What a horrible and terrible thing that these poor young girls and children suffered at the hands of Epstein. We're not really thinking anything. But when suddenly we saw victims standing up in that room and with their arms in the air saying, no, we haven't spoken to anyone at all, suddenly we knew who we were thinking about, didn't we?
Yeah, and it's worth making the point, Vanessa, that this was also the week that saw Ghislaine Maxwell plead the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination when she appeared for a deposition before the House Oversight Committee. That is the same committee that has now sent a summons to Lord Mandelson saying that they want to hear from him. He, of course, doesn't have any legal requirement to respond to that summons. He's not an American citizen. They could issue a subpoena to try and compel his testimony. They could do the same to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, but both men would be able to ignore that, safe in the knowledge that there's no way in which that subpoena can be enforced against them. Or they could do exactly what Ghislaine Maxwell did, which is agree to appear on a video link. I mean, she, of course, was incarcerated in her relatively low security prison in Texas for her appearance, and they could plead the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination. But in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell, who actually did it over the last few days, saying that she would only cooperate with the committee if she was given clemency, her lawyer said she was itching to tell the committee that Donald Trump and former President Bill Clinton, she could completely exonerate them of any wrongdoing, but she would only do it if President Trump granted her clemency. Again, that was a further demonstration of the victims and survivors just being completely disregarded by, in her case, obviously a key player in all of this.
And just tell me a little bit about Marco Rubio's speech in Munich today, Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah, Mr. Nice Guy compared to J.D. Vance a year ago, who, of course, shocked European leaders with the strength of his rhetoric at the Munich Security Conference. But while Marco Rubio didn't embrace some of the bruising tone that J.D. Vance adopted last year, the message was exactly the same. I mean, the notion, I see on this side of the Atlantic, Politico is describing it as a Valentine's Day love letter to Europe. It was not that. It was another clarion warning that the Trump administration wants to see massive political change in our country, in France, in Germany, all over the map. They want parties of the right, like Reform UK, like Rassemblement National, like the AFD, in government. That's what he means when he talks about the revitalisation and the revival of Europe. And so the notion that this got a standing ovation is delusional on the part of some of the people who were in the room, because the message might have been more politely expressed, but it's very clear what he was saying.
Simon Marks, thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure and an honour to have you on the programme.